Buongiorno everyone, this is Salvatore Gangale from Castello delle Serre. Now in our previous videos that you have been watching, generally I have been doing the series on the history of our castle, and my son has been doing the cooking lessons. But today we decided to do an inversion of roles. Why is that? Well, a number of our guests, the ladies who have been here, particularly the ladies who have been here, some to whom I had given a few cooking lessons, are requesting that we do at least a particular recipe for one of our special signature dishes called Rosette. Quite frankly, I am baffled that these women would insist on my doing it, because what logic is there to someone watching an old man like myself and preferring that to a young, handsome young man like my son? It's beyond me. But then there is no logic. So anyway, this is the purpose and the reason why I am here. Rosette, meaning literally roses, small roses, because of the shape and the look of the pasta. It's a traditional dish from the north of Italy, from Modena. Modena, you know, the land of Ferraris, the land of balsamic vinegar, the land of cured hams, the land of Pavarotti music, the land of richness and wealth. So when you understand and see this particular pasta, you will certainly have a deeper understanding of the word richness, because this is certainly one of those pastas where you cannot be looking at your waistline. For this particular recipe, because of course there are different steps, we will actually be doing 3 different segments. The first will be the actual making of the pasta. The second will be making one of the ingredients, which is called bechamel. And the third will be assembling all of this and baking it. So the ingredients for the first segment, making of the pasta, are very simple. Flour, eggs, just a pinch of salt, and a little small quantity of olive oil. I prefer using a mixture of flours. So for example, I like to do a ratio 1 to 2 regarding the use of flours. I enjoy very much using a little bit of semolina flour with the regular ordinary flour. So in this case, since this recipe calls for 300 grams, 300 grams is about 10.5 ounces for our friends in the US. 300 grams of flour, so I will do 100 of semolina, 200 of the ordinary flour, 1 spoonful of pure virgin olive oil, and just a little dab of salt. The olive oil actually is optional. Recipes traditionally from the north do not call for it. Those from the south do, so it's up to your taste. So put it in a nice little heap, the center of which we make a little, you've seen this many times before. Yes, nothing new under the sun. Women in Italy have been doing these for millenniums. Okay? And in there, we're going to put a little pinch of salt. Now, again, some recipes don't even call for the salt, because you understand that the pasta, once it's boiled in the salt water. We're going to put 1 little spoonful of olive oil. As I said, this is optional. In the south of Italy, they generally do this. In the north of Italy, they do not use this. The reason? Very simple. Historically, in the north, they just have not used olive oil. They have used butter in the place of this. And of course, to melt butter over this would not have been as easy as adding this bit of olive oil. We're going to add the 3 eggs. Now, these seem to be very good sized eggs. Then, with a fork, we're going to work this. So the idea is simply to mix all of this before starting to actually work it with the palm of your hands. And of course, depending on the size of the egg, if we find that it's a little too soft, we might possibly have to add just a little bit more flour. As you can see, Now the flour is absorbing most of it, and before you know it, we'll actually be able to work this with our hands. You notice that the eggs in Italy tend to be quite more colorful, more rich in their yellow color. The reason for this is very simple. It's the different type of feed that the eggs are given. So in Italy, the yolk is actually called the red of the egg, il rosso d'uovo. Now we can find that it's going to be a little easier for us to mix it. I hear an angelic voice in the background. This is the latest addition to our castle family. It's my little wonderful granddaughter, Stella. So we're hoping that she will give us ample time for us to be able to complete this video for you, as Casey, her mother, my daughter-in-law, our Texan flour, is the one that is doing the filming. As you can see, it's starting to take shape. Notice how we just tend to fold over. Now at this point, I've been doing it with my fingers, with the tips of my fingers, but in a moment you'll be noticing that I'm going to be using the palm of my hand. Seems to me that this is going to be the proper consistency. So although it seemed that those eggs were a little large, I thought I might be needing to add a little more flour, but perhaps this will have sufficed. Because it is a tried and true recipe. As I said, every Italian woman knows this. Of course, they don't need to refer to any recipe book, because this is something that has been going on in our household for generations and generations. No, I still see that it is a little bit, just a little bit sticky to the hand. So I just added just a bit more flour. There, simply to make it a little more workable. Notice just all the movement has to do with the palm and the wrist. You see, it's nice and smooth. Okay, what I'm going to do is wrap this in a little bit of plastic and just let it rest. We're going to let it rest for about half an hour. So the pasta dough has actually been sitting here now for about 30 minutes while we made the bechamel. In looking at it and looking at its consistency, I noticed that it's a little too soft. So what we are going to do, see, sometimes in cooking you really need to be able to adjust and to use actual judgment. So what I'm going to do is I am going to work it just a little bit more by adding just a little bit flour to just take away some of the moisture. Of course, you want to make sure in terms of its consistency, you see, that you get it to the point where it no longer sticks to the palm of your hand. And if I had started rolling it out as it was without having added this little bit of extra flour, it would have actually done that. Therefore, I could tell that it wasn't really perfect. So we're going to render it perfect right now. There we go. Look at how nice and smooth. Now we're going to put it back in plastic. This time we're going to let it rest just 10 minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pinch it just like a balloon. If it comes back, that means it has the proper consistency. Notice if we put that, eventually it comes back. This means that the dough is actually ready now to be formed. I have made that into a long formation such as this. And what I'm going to do, because we want to get the right width, is I'm going to actually cut it by using a little bit of flour on the knife right down the middle, right there. And we're going to first begin working it by using a rolling pin. Right here, make sure that the rolling pin is floured. I'm gonna put that one right there, and we're gonna start rolling it. Secret is more or less from the center, working out. If you don't have a pasta machine, of course it's fine to continue doing this with the rolling pin, but of course it makes for a little more even. It's still a little too thick for us to run it through the first gauge of the pasta machine. This probably is thin enough that it might work. Machines have, depending on the opening, of course, of the rolling pins, they have a gauge. So the largest number, of course, is what we're gonna start with, and then depending on how thin we want to roll our pasta, we'll decide to what number to bring it to. Notice at the very, very edge, you want to possibly get a little bit thinner so that it'll be a little easier for it to enter into the pasta machine. There we go. I would say that these might be, the way to do that is to figure out if this is indeed, there she goes. So this is the widest gauge. Now, as I said, if you don't have a pasta machine, of course, it's possible to just continue doing this with the rolling pin. But of course, there you need a little bit more expertise. And of course, the expertise only comes through practice. So I had the machine at the largest opening. Right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna skip two. We're gonna do two at a time so as to thin it out, because of course this would be way too thick of a pasta sheet too. You certainly couldn't possibly, this would be like making, this is almost like a pizza dough. Each time I do this, so that you understand, so you don't have to watch me do each one from a step to the other, is I will jump two numbers, and of course to make it more manageable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it right down the middle, because of course it will get longer with each step that we take. Okay, we're running it one last time to the second, to the last finest setting on the machine. So this would be number 2 on the setting on your pasta machine. Makes it a little bit better. We're going to run it through once more. And since we need to make sheets of a certain uniform size, because we're going to roll these. So I'm going to take more or less the knife length right there. There goes 1, there goes 2, and there goes 3. For the sake of keeping this, if you decide to do this and then perhaps, because it is time consuming as you notice, perhaps decide to do the assembly the next day, what you could do is make sure you get a little bit of semolina flour so that they don't adhere to each other, right there. And what you could do is place them one on top of the other, like this. Put it on a plate, cover them in plastic, and then you'll be able to use them the following day. In assembling the rosettas, one of the principal elements is bechamel. Now, bechamel is a sauce. It's a roux, actually. In Italy, it's very, very popular. It's used in many, many, many dishes. And generally, it's the type of thing, actually, every respectable Italian refrigerator has bechamel in it all the time. Nowadays, of course, it's possible for us to simply go and obtain it at the supermarket. But in the States, you aren't going to be able to do that because I don't think it's that popular. So it's a very, very, very easy, and you can make it, you can keep it in a pan, keep it in the refrigerator, and you could use it for many, many purposes. When you make a wonderful lasagna, when you make parmigiana, when you choose to add it to a sauce to make it a little more rosé, a lot more creamy. This is the essence of bechamel, bechamella. Okay, we're gonna start by melting the butter. By the way, 100 grams of butter, 100 grams of flour, 1 liter of milk. Okay, so I know right now that I'm using 100 grams of butter. Okay, put it in the larger pan, and we're going to slowly melt those 100 grams of butter. In the meantime, we're going to heat the entire liter of milk. Now, of course, we want to be very, very careful that we don't bring that to a boiling point, because that could certainly make a mess to your stove top. So we have the milk warming up. We have the butter that's going to start melting. As I start, before I start sifting the flour into the butter, I want you to notice this excessive use of butter. This is typically something of the Italian cuisine from the north. The south of Italy butter does not really exist in the tradition of cooking in the south of Italy. So erroneously in the United States, they think of northern Italian food as being light versus the southern Italian food as tending to be heavier food. This is very, very untrue. On the contrary, imagine that in Italy, the use of butter in ancient times was something very, very unheard of. The very first time there is a mention of butter is, believe it or not, by Julius Caesar. After he conquered Gaul, when he wrote a letter to the Senate, imagine how he describes these barbarians who would consume butter. Here's what he says. Imagine these people, they have no culture regarding the finesse of food. For example, they use as a main staple in their cooking the fat of the milk. In other words, butter. So while I'm stirring, we're going to sift this flour in there. Since that has melted, there's really no reason anymore for it to be cooking it any further. Careful so that it doesn't form. There we go, nice and uniform. In the meantime, our milk is warming up nicely. You could tell that this is certainly going to add flavor to food, but it's certainly not going to add any favors to your waistline. You need to be aware of that. Okay, the milk I see starting. You don't want it to come to actually a boiling point, but you do want to get it nice and warm. We continue this process of slowly sifting all of the flour. And once we have done that, and made sure that we don't have any glumps. There we go, look, nice and smooth right there. And now we will add the milk. Okay, we add the hot milk and continue stirring. Put the flame back on. Not too high. There we go, we have the full liter of milk. Okay. We'll be stirring this, making certain when we come to the edges of the pan, in case there is a little bit of those little bumps. So we take them out. We're gonna add some nutmeg. Nutmeg, of course, you know, just gives a wonderful flavor. I would say that would suffice right there. And some salt. You see it's coming to a boiling point, so we want to be careful that we constantly stir it. As you can see, it's thickening. We lower the gas. And add some salt. Right there. Notice how it is thickening. And after about 10 minutes time, actually, this could be turned off, left to cool. And once it cools, of course, it hardens even further. And there we go. We have beautifully homemade bechamel. Now, because I personally love the flavor of nutmeg, I've added a little bit more than you wouldn't necessarily have to, because it's just a personal preference. So you could go a little lighter on the nutmeg. There we go. We turn it off and we're gonna let it cool. Not only will we let it cool, but this wonderful cream that we have, we will keep in the refrigerator for various uses. As I said, when you make lasagna, in between the sheets and the meat sauce, there's nothing better than just dabs of wonderful, moist, delicious, rich bechamel. In our particular recipe of the rosettas, we're actually going to cover the dough, the sheets of pasta, with this before we add the other ingredients. So here we are again, welcome back. Referring to our recipe for the rosette. Actually, this is a 3-part recipe. So the first part was making of the pasta, the second part making of the bechamel, and the third part is the composition of all of these elements. Now, if you are fortunate enough to live in a community where you have easy accessibility, for example, to a fresh pasta shop, there's no need for you to do all that hard work. Even today, the people of Italy don't really consume that much time making their own pasta. They go to the local pasta shop and buy the already formed sheets of pasta. Bechamel is readily available in Italy at any grocery store. Perhaps not so the case in the United States. That's why we showed you how to make it. In assembling this wonderful pasta recipe and putting it all together, we need these particular elements. Ham, cooked ham, not prosciutto crudo, but cooked ham. Emmental cheese or Swiss cheese, Parmigiano, a little bit of black pepper, cream, and of course the bechamel that we made already. So first thing, we start by blanching the sheets of pasta that we have made. Remember that based on the quantity of water boiling, this is how you decide more or less how much rock salt to put in it. The idea is to create a salt which is similar to that in the ocean. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these sheets, very quickly blanch them in the boiling water. This is fresh pasta, you understand, so it doesn't really need to cook excessively. So we're going to keep it in there at the most 1 minute. Then I'm going to remove it and put it in the cold water so that it stops the temperature, the cooking. So after 1 minute, as you can see, they're ready to be taken out. You notice that they just float gently. So we will remove them. Now the reason we don't cook them thoroughly and why we want it to stop its cooking, because remember that heat would continue cooking the pasta by putting it in cold water, is because we actually are going to finish this off with cream and butter in the oven, so it will continue cooking. Once we have parboiled all of the pasta, we set up a clean tablecloth. You want to make sure that you use a tablecloth, for example, that hasn't been laundered in a strong type of detergent, because actually that taste will transfer on to the pasta. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these on that tablecloth, and you'll notice I'm going to try to lay them as close as possible to each other. See, the reason for this is, of course, is to dry out the pasta a little bit. Now, you'll notice as I'm assembling this that this is certainly no easy job. So often our guests that come here say, "Oh my God, this is the best pasta I've ever eaten in my life." Well, without question, it's very, very good. Of course, when you consider the amount of time, and let me tell our guests that have been here, each time you've had these, this is actually the process I have to go through all the time. So when you consider how difficult it is, you might consider the possibility that it would probably be more economically, not only financially, but certainly time-wise, for you to get on a plane, pay for an airline ticket to come here and to have my wonderful homemade rosette. We now have the sheets of pasta. We flipped them over. They seem to be pretty dry. And what we're gonna do, first step, is apply bechamel. So with a spoon, right over. Now, you don't want to go too heavy on this, okay? Now, applying the bechamel, actually, the purpose of that, remember, this is a butter base, so therefore once it cooks, it melts and just makes everything very, very moist. But the secret of this also is to serve as a glue. This is what I'm about to do, okay? At the edges, you'll notice that with my fingertips, okay, I will try and spread this more or less evenly and try to get definitely to the edges so that the edges are not left without the possibility of adhering to each other. So the reason I placed them so close together was simply so as to make this process a little easier. You see, I'm just gonna shave some wonderful fresh Parmigiano cheese over them, and we won't have too much waste because they're close to each other. Now you will notice occasionally that there you might see a little bit of lump on that bechamel sauce. Don't be concerned about it, because of course, being butter, once this bakes in the oven, it's going to melt. So those lumps realistically don't exist. However, the reason they are there is simply because in the haste of making this video, when I was making the bechamel, you might recall that I used a wooden spoon in stirring it. Realistically, I should have been using a whisk, and of course that would not have happened. Next, a very thinly sliced ham. Okay, at the very edge, you notice I'm going to leave a little bit of space. The reason for that, so that when we roll them, that can serve as glue to hold them together. Now, in placing this, remember, of course, this is, a hint of a flavor of the sweetness of the ham that combines, of course, with the sweetness of the bechamel and with the sweetness of the other ingredient, which is Emmental cheese, the Swiss cheese, which, as you know, is a sweet cheese. Because you don't want this to end up feeling like you're having a ham sandwich. This is a dish of pasta, so ultimately the flavor should be in the dough, the pasta. The Emmental cheese, you notice from a form, what I did is with a peeler, with a vegetable peeler, you see I made very, very thin slices. And now what I'm going to do with those slices, we're going to add those as well. And we're going to leave some space in between them. We don't want to, again, we don't want to overkill it. Now, a little bit of black pepper. Another dab of Parmigiano cheese. Right there. We are ready to roll this like a Cuban cigar. And in the end, you see we have a little rolled, perfectly rolled, like a cannelloni. The last step then, of course, is simply putting it in a baking pan and putting it in the oven. To do that, we have to butter really well the interior of the baking pan. Now here I'm actually doing two because I want to show you, if you have a little mini baking dish such as this, if you want to do individual portions, because visually, of course, this makes it very attractive, or if you want to just bake enough for everybody and then of course just be able to dish it out individually. The quantities that we made, which have produced, you see these as many as you can see here, actually would suffice for a lovely dinner for 8 people, with the exception of the bechamel, because I told you I use that for many other different dishes, so that's a much larger quantity. If you wish to make it, perhaps when you refer to that, you could just cut half the sizes of that. Now, in taking the actual roll and in placing it in the baking dish, I'm going to look at the size and I'm going to decide whether to cut it into 3 or 4 or possibly 5, depending on the length of it. So this over here, for example, would be perfect to cut into 4 individual little pieces right there. And you want to cut them as evenly as possible. We're going to do that one, and we're going to find another one more or less the same size as that, and we're going to do that into 4 as well. Then in the buttered pan, we're going to place them standing upright. We're going to shake. Remember, this is fresh baking cream. Fresh baking cream, when you refrigerate it, tends to form the fat tends to coagulate, so it's always a good idea to shake it well, so that once you open it and use it, you get uniformity in the context. You see, look, right over, get some of it inside. You don't have to kill it, but you don't want to do too much. However, remember that this pasta is going to soak up some of this cream. So for that quantity, I would bring it to about that level on the side, right there. We're going to add a little bit of black pepper once more. And of course, the other wonder of Italy, genuine, high quality Parmigiano cheese. Now, we're gonna place this in the oven. The temperature in the oven, I would say, I generally keep the oven at 180 degrees Celsius. That's about 350-ish, 360 degrees. And cooking time, of course, depends on the quantity that is there. So in a quantity such as this, it would probably take about 20 minutes. This one here would take 15 minutes. Of course, since this was somewhat labor intensive, perhaps when you make them, you want to consider making enough that you could put away for a rainy day. For example, this stuff is very easy to make and to freeze. Once you have rolled it, as we have done, you just get a little bit of plastic wrap. Make sure you do it tightly on the sides like this. Fold it over so as to create a nice little seal. And then possibly put them in a Ziploc bag, nice and even. Place them in the freezer. When you take them out, just take them out half an hour before. It's actually easier to cut them when they're still partially frozen, and you just make the same arrangement that we made. See, right here, ready? We're gonna put some foil and we're gonna stick them in the oven, and we're gonna have the most incredible lunch. Remember, I made these for 4 of us today. This is our luncheon. I'm gonna put a little bit of wrap in that one as well, but because it's smaller, we're gonna put that in the oven 5 minutes after we put the other one. Into the oven she goes. We're gonna wait 5 minutes, then I'm gonna throw the other in there, and after it's baking, we're going to show you what it looks like. So we've removed the foil, it's partially cooked as you can see, and we're gonna put it back in the oven to give it a little bit golden top. For the larger pan, we had set 15 minutes of cooking time. Of course, you know, a lot depends on many factors. For example, how cold was the cream when you put it in there? So that was an indicative time. The important thing is to look through the glass on the oven and to see when, of course, when the cream has bubbled and when a nice golden formation has formed on the top, on the ridges of the pasta. So I think it should be ready, gauging from what I see. Clearly, you see what I mean about the golden ridges on the pasta. As you can see, the cream has hardened, it's bubbling. And while the other individual serving is getting ready, I'm going to suggest to you that since you've seen how difficult it was, you want to come to Tuscany, of course, to enjoy this. If that's not possible for the time being, of course, there is another option. You could go to my lovely sister's restaurant in the community of Santa Luz in San Diego, California, Rosina's. And of course, there you could have this wonderful Rosetta. You can feel like you are in Tuscany because the interior has been recently redesigned to recall people of our wonderful property here in Tuscany, Castello delle Serre. So thank you for having watched. Let's take out the little individual one and see what that looks like. And then we're going to just enjoy. Wow! Buon appetito!